Welcome to LeonCo and welcome to your weekly video. Welcome to LeonCo and welcome to your weekly video, and we are continuing our topic for the month of September. And on this week's video, we'll be discussing our second market crash. And yes, if you go down in history, one of the biggest market crashes, or maybe the one that you most recall, is the stock market crash of 2008, which has a very particular name, the HouseMarket Crash. And why is this? Well, we will jump right to it and explain why do they call it the HouseMarket Crash. Well, let's give a brief history on how did this happen and what built up to this crash in 2008. Well, in the late 90s, early 2000, it was very hard for people to get loans, to people to add loans to buy houses, to get credit, and the federal government eased off on some of the restrictions that people could have to try to apply for a loan, to try and raise their credit, and they started to provide people with bigger loans, better credit scores, and people who could not afford necessarily to buy houses, to buy real estate, to get assets, could now have that opportunity because the federal government and lenders have been easing off on their restrictions and provided people the opportunity to get more loans, to get more money in their pockets, to try to acquire more assets. And why is this important? Because from 2000 to 2007, early 2008, this became a very big problem because people were starting to get loans, to start to ask for lots of money that they cannot afford. And especially this affected in the house market, in the mortgage sector, because people were acquiring homes that they cannot afford. And how did this affect the house market? Well, this especially affected because houses and real estate started to climb up in prices that were not realistic, because the houses were starting to get inflated in prices because there was such a demand for them and people could not afford them. Yes, they could afford getting the loan, but they could not afford paying it back. And this became to start to develop a huge bubble in the housing market. Well, how did this affect the stock market? The people in the stock market saw that the house market was one of the most solid markets you could have. So many large companies started to invest in the house market. And they put up lots of money into the house market to try and save that money, to try and make more money off of it, or just try to protect their money. The reality is that this became such a big problem because money in the stock market was being passed to the house market sector. And the house market sector was not a stable market because there was a big bubble building up. Well, when we hit 2007 and early 2008, this started to reflect a huge problem in the sector. People started to not pay their loans, a default started to build up, and people started to lose their homes because they had eviction notices that they cannot pay their houses. Well, on a very important date in 2008, it passed on to history, September 28, 2008, the stock market crashed in just one day. No signs, no warnings, it crashed. The Dow Jones crashed a record high 777% in just one day. This was a huge blow for the stock market, and to this day, we are still seeing the effects of the crash of this stock market. Many people lost their jobs, lost their homes, And the reality is the stock market unfolded right in front of our eyes because most people betted on a market that they thought that would never crash, and that was the house market sector. And the reality is that they tried to inflate and create this huge bubble, providing people with lots of money, that eventually it affected the stock market and it affected everyone, especially the economy. Well, the federal government intervened and gave out lots of help to lots of companies, and the reality is that most companies failed or crashed throughout this process, but other huge names tried their best and received federal aid, that they're still facing those consequences to this day. The three big motor companies of the United States, General Motors, Chrysler, and Ford, were one of the biggest companies that were affected by this, and they asked for the federal government for help in this crisis. So we wanted to discuss this stock market crash because it's the one that most of us remember. It's one of the biggest stock market crashes that we faced in history, and we tried our best to condense how everything happened without getting to many technical issues or technical defaults that happened throughout the stock market crash, because we just wanted to share with you guys how the stock market can be affected by circumstances that are not necessarily related to the stock market or even companies that are in the stock market. So this has been your weekly video. Stay tuned for our next video where we discuss how this 2020 stock market crash could affect the economy in the future. But we always want to remember you guys to stay safe, stay healthy, and always remember to have that king mentality.